I mean, I feel the same about laundry, right? Like you start the laundry and then like sometime later you got to go move it. And then sometime later you got to go get it again. And then you got to fold it. So it's like a series of chores spread out over time. And for whatever reason, I'd rather just
do it all.
I want to do it and be done, which I mean, I don't wash my clothes by hand, but maybe I should.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 366 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the web programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the art not programmer.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's May 31st, 2020. And before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And we'd also like to thank our supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you very much for letting us grab your money every month. So it's been a fairly quiet week, and not a lot of time has passed since we recorded last episode because we got a lot of scheduling weirdness because we're going to our dad's retirement party. We're all going on a little trip upstate, up country, up to Iowa.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Sam's going west state. We're going.
I'm actually going down and over because we got to go to Charlotte and then over.
Yeah.
You know,
you're gonna take your mole machine and kind of tunnel down through.
Yep.
Down and through. So our dad, our Druid Dad, the one who we've told stories about how he can like look at a plant and tell you what it is, where it's from, how healthy it is,
how many babes it's had.
Yeah.
And also when you need to prune it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's like, don't cut this one back in the spring. It'll kill it. You know what I mean? So you got to wait until early fall.
He's like 3.72 days from now, you're going to need to trim that branch back a quarter inch. Otherwise, you're going to have a real problem. You know, one of those. So he has been a surgeon in our hometown for 30 years. Mm-hmm. And he did some more medicine stuff before that because, you know, when you become a doctor, they sort of torture you for like a decade, I think.
I think part of it is just deeply understanding pain. You know what I mean? You have to deeply understand before they let you practice medicine.
Right, because if your life is easy, then you can't understand what your patients are going through.
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah, totally. So we just want to say that's very cool. Big congrats for an amazing career. And now I think he's getting himself a motorcycle and he's just gonna ride off into the sunset.
Literally.
That's what you do. So he's getting all the necessary safety equipment and everything. But I think, you know, if that's a good retirement plan, I feel.
Yeah.
You know?
Saddle up on your steel steed and head off into the clouds. You know, just head off into the mountainside. Yeah.
Because people will say like, what are you going to do when you retire? And you can say, you mean where am I going to do? Everywhere. Yep. I don't know what I'm going to do when I get there, but I'm going to go there.
But getting there is the journey, you know, so that's what's going to be all about.
The journey is the journey.
Yeah, I'm mainly excited because this dude has worked his body to the bone healing other people for 30 years. I mean, dude's back exploded while doing surgery this one time. And he sort of wrapped it up and then left, which is insane on a bunch of levels.
Well, his back exploded me like a disc in his spine kind of ruptured or something.
Yeah.
To the point where one of the muscles in his leg died. So, you know, pretty.
He's like, well, let me make this a little pretty first before I hand it off to, you know, my support.
Yeah, let me finish up this surgery before I go scream for 3 weeks. Undergo several surgical procedures. Dude's a badass.
Kind of a badass.
So,
yeah.
And now he can finally take care of himself, you know, and not have to spend so much time saving. Got to spend so much time saving everybody else. They can deal with their own shit now.
Yeah,
you know?
Deal with it. So, congrats, Dad, and happy retirement. It's fun.
Yeah. So, since it's kind of a strange episode, timing wise, we're just going to go into questions since there's not a lot of news. So, you guys ready? Just ready to go down?
So ready.
Yeah, I kind of thought that was going to be a Stranger Things like lead in, you know, because like
season 4,
a strange week. It's good.
There you go.
But the only spoiler I'm going to give you is that it's not the whole season. So if you're ready to if you haven't watched it yet, and you're ready just to binge, you have it all done. It won't be done when you're done because the rest comes out for July 4th weekend. So
I like the idea that could be a spoiler. That like, oh man, I wanted to be caught. I wanted to be caught off guard and surprised by running out of episodes. The ending is ruined. You told me the ending, which is that there isn't one.
yeah.
I'm waiting. I don't want to. If there's a show, I did this with Arcane. I waited until it was fully out, and then I just watched it straight through. And I'm so glad I did.
Well, I will say though, there's psych studies that support that actually you enjoy things more if they're spread out. Shows in particular, if you actually spread them out like over some time.
But I enjoy them. Or
when you say
people.
Do you mean
I'm saying the broad y'all of scientific literature. Which I think
so I think about it this way. Most people enjoyed using the dishwasher, right? And I hate that thing. I hate it so much.
I don't enjoy the dishwasher.
That's what I'm saying. Because the dishwasher gives me a series of chores to do later, right? Like I got to do some dishes now, and then I got to wait. And then the next time I'm getting a dish, I got to be like, oh, wait. Are there dishes in the dishwasher? And if there are, I got to open it. And then I've got to decide, crap, there's a lot of dishes in here. All I wanted was one dish, but now do I unload these or do I leave them as a chore bomb for the next person?
It sounds just sort of like a work visibility problem,
It is. Dishwashers don't they obscure a bunch of work. I mean, I feel the same about laundry, right? Like you start the laundry and then like sometime later you got to go move it. And then sometime later you got to go get it again. And then you got to fold it. So it's like a series of chores spread out over time. And for whatever reason, I'd rather just
you want to do it all.
I want to do it and be done. Which I mean, I don't wash my clothes by hand, but maybe I should.
I think if you do that once, you'll probably have a lot more love for your laundry machines. So it might be good. You know what I mean? Might be a good exercise anyways, regardless.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I don't know. Maybe I would be curious to see that survey done on people of different neurotypes. See like how do you deal with starting a thing and then stopping it, and then starting it again and then stopping it?
Is it better for everybody or just most people is essentially the question.
Most people.
Yeah. Who's being obscured?
And is it really most people or is it, is it because usually in those studies when the end result is like people prefer this or do this or whatever, right? When you look at the actual spread of the data, there's so much overlap between the two cases that the only way you can make the claim is statistically, as in you can't pick a person and say that they'll fall into that camp because the correlation is so weak, right? When it's strong enough that that's probably real. It's just that it's kind of like, it's like human height, right? Because it's easy to say like on average, this group of people are taller than some other group, right? But when you look at the height distribution, though, the overlap is like 60%. It's enormous, right, between the two sets of curves.
So most people are actually about the same height between the two groups, even though on average a group is taller.
Yes, because if you pick any one person and all you had was their height, you can't meaningfully guess which group they're going to fall into, right? And the same.
So if you say
unless they're an extreme, basically.
And even then, if they would
have to be,
extreme.
they'd have to be real far out there.
Yep.
So, anyways, Stranger Things. I'm gonna binge it. I'm gonna binge it later.
Do it,
because that's my style.
You will be binging
let's go
for
to
a
questions.
long time because the episodes are long.
It's basically a movie each time, so just you got to really buckle in for that binge. Get your binge pants.
Maybe I'll do episode, take a walk and let it sink in. And then next episode, just like a 5-minute breather, let it marinate, grab some snacks, bathroom break.
I think it'll probably be a whole day by the time that
second
part's out. So,
because I spent most of the day watching the part that did come out, like almost the entire of a Saturday, and then I also still had one episode left the next morning that I had to watch. So
it's a long game.
It's a lot. It's good though.
Oh man,
I enjoyed it,
and it's not even done. So yeah, I guess I'll need to set aside a weekend. But I'm gonna do it. All right. Highest upvoted question comes from TimConceivable, who says, correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
But I believe I remember you guys saying that part of the reason Scuffle Buddies was scrapped was because it was too big in scope for the studio at the time.
Yeah, it was.
Now that you're nearing the completion of the Game Changer, does that mean that Scuffle Buddies or a game like it might still be a possibility in the future? Or will elements of it end up in Crashlands 2?
I would say, well, we're not going to make Scuffle Buddies. I'm just going to go ahead and stomp on that.
Yeah, that's fair.
Step on
That is
it.
a risky game.
Yes. It's a little too damn weird. So if there was some way to slice it down into a much smaller little thing that you could do in like a month or something, then maybe, but also I don't know if I cared that much about it, to be honest. It was just fun but weird, and who knows. But as far as like the scope,
it was pretty cool.
it was cool.
Weird.
As far as the scope thing, the reality is that the Game Changer extends our ability to hit large scope projects massively. And so if we had the production processes in general also, which is the other big point, all the production stuff we've been doing, as we talked about last episode, is about scale, right? Every single part of it, from how the studio, even just the times that people work, everybody works flexibly, and all sorts of other stuff about how we handle our email and using, Favreau and all sorts of stuff. So everything we do has been about increasing the amount of stuff, the amount of throughput, which means that if we did make Scuffle Buddies now, we could. I think it's very easy to say.
I'd say what we're trying to get to is no scope game development.
Yeah.
Where basically people
right.
are always talking about scoping projects. Why do you need to manage scope? The answer is because it takes time to do things.
Yeah, it's true.
Right? So if you have 6 months to make a game or a year to make a game, then you have to scope it based on time, and based on resources and complexity and everything else. So think about it this way, is if everything that you do, you can do almost instantly, okay, then you don't have to scope your game.
Yeah.
You just make the game that you want to make, right? Which, of course, this is an impossible ideal because there will always be parts of the game that will take time to make. But you want to get as close to no scoping as possible, right?
Yeah.
I think
You just do what you want.
There's a difference between, I think, or at least we could define a difference between scope and scale, right? Because to me, scalability means we have created a way of doing something so that now we can apply input and then in a linear way get output. So we can keep on adding more input, get more output. It's just a one-to-one kind of relationship, or ideally a one-to-many, like some leverage.
Yes, because growth is 1-to-1, right? It's like more resources with the same level of output per resource. Scale is more per resource.
And then scope, though, I think has to do with complexity, right? So because when people talk about out of scope or talk about the scope of a game, they're not talking about like necessarily just the number of things, which is a lot of what we are really able to do with the Game Changer. But the other part is the dealing with complexity. And that has a limit on it, which both is the tools, but actually more importantly is the ability for your designer brain to actually grok the relationships between things, because that is something that you can't, once you go past the ability for a person just to conceive of the thing and have a mental model of it, then now unless the system itself can operate in some degree autonomously with like things plugging into it, then that's where you hit the inability. You can scale, like you can scale each part by adding more inputs and getting more outputs, but you might not be able to increase the scope.
I think I don't think about it as complexity just so much as resource management, right? Which is like scope is about relativity as far as I'm concerned, which is if you have a game design that you can't build with the resources that you have, whether it's time or people or money or whatever, then that's out of scope, right? So and it could be that it's because it's so complex that everything takes too long, or maybe it's just too big. Like you're just, you're trying to make too many things, each of which are actually quite simple. But you just don't have the time because it just takes a week to make each thing or whatever.
You're kind of talking about like breadth versus depth, basically, at that point, right? So like as an example, if you make a hack and slash game, right? Or actually, let's take the original Crashlands. Actually, a good example. The weapons. Every weapon was the same weapon in the original Crashlands. Like, we dialed some numbers around a little bit, but they didn't functionally, on the design side, you don't have to think actually at all about what the next weapon is because it is just the same as the one before it. The numbers are algorithmically pumped up, right?
The swing animation is the same.
Yeah.
It's all the same.
So we're talking about scope in with that kind of content, right? There's content scope, which is how many things of a known sort are essentially required to produce what feels like a full game experience or the game experience that you're intending to produce, right? But then there's the other kind of scope, which is basically, I think, what Adam's talking about, the complexity scope, which is, okay, yeah, you have weapons, but you're going to need gadgets, trinkets, creatures, right? Like, how many kinds of things are there throughout the whole system? How many different systems, maybe, and how do they talk to each other? And that's sort of like your complexity, your depth aspect, maybe.
Yeah, because you can either just have lots of stuff and it may belong a few different dimensions, right? Or you can have less stuff, but that interacts with each other somehow to get combinatorial complexity. And you can scale in both those ways. The fastest way to do it is with combinatorial stuff, just by mixing things together somehow so you get new experiences with the same stuff.
But roguelikes are so popular.
Yeah, but that's the stuff that gets really hard as you add new systems, because the combinatorial complexity explodes so fast that's where in that design role, as you're trying because you're trying to build out a kind of experience for players to have, right? Or a collection
Not just
of
a soup, you know?
Yeah, not a soup of like unknown. I don't know what's going to happen, right? And so I think I do think there is some kind of a limit there of just how. Well, and not that there's like a limit built in, but in terms of like that's a thing you're going to hit when you're scaling a game, when you're trying to make it bigger, when you're trying to make it more thorough, you know, to try to simulate a world, try to do something like that. I think that's one of those things that you can get out of hand really, really easily, and it requires good tools definitely to manage that, but also. It's still, even with the really good tools, at some point, it could go beyond the ability for one person to just kind of know how to reason about.
Yeah. So there's probably a bunch of just different dimensions here then, because it's like, so one of the things is this idea of like resource scope, right? Which is just, do you have what you need to make the thing? But then there's sort of like cognitive scope, which is this thing so fucking complicated that you actually can't deal with it anymore? In which case, you don't have the tools to manage the cognitive scope of it. And then there's this like design scope or experiential scope, which is like, let's say you're making a game like Kerbal Space Program. You can build rockets, right? Mm-hmm. And then you say, well, I mean, if you can build rockets like and rovers, why don't we also add the ability to make cars and buses and trains, and then like you can start up a transportation program. And now that we've got that, what about like managing this? It's like, okay, so now you just like have the world, right? Yep. Just the whole world as a game. So at that point, it starts to become too much of everything.
Well, you actually move out of marketability scope at that point, right? Because like,
it's trying to do too many things.
And you stop being able to predict how, like, because if you had that scenario where it's now just like transportation simulator of all forms of transportation, right? And now you're trying to predict how to handle how science points are allocated. Like, because Kerbal Space Program, you basically get science points by accomplishing stuff, right? And then you spend them on research so you can do more stuff. So it's one thing to balance that in the context of like, oh, it's a space program, so you do all this stuff, right? But if you can also spend those points on your bus program and on your whatever, right? And then trying to predict how what is it going to mean for at the tail end of the bus program? What is the state of my space program now? And like, how do those things interact? In that case, actually, because they interacted in a small number of ways, but across this but very deep, they have very deep dives you can go into on either part, you know? So then that also becomes really hard to manage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And is it really providing a better experience? Is it helping the game, or is it just like, here's just more stuff?
I think to me, so that's the real things with scope blowout are typically when you're adding things that don't actually add to the experience that you're trying to hit. And I think it's the different target at that point, which is that to me, I want to maximally make like Crashlands 2 in this case, right? The problem is you don't know exactly what that is, right? Until it's done, which means it's easy to go off and make a weird appendix, you know what I mean? A vestigial system that you thought was doing some work for that core vision when actually it isn't. And you could spend a lot of time in those zones. And I think that's where having just a clear idea of what you're trying to get out of something is super important.
Yeah. So it really comes down to then, because people talk about these things as if they're absolute, like, because you'll hear people just say to some designer like, "Oh, that scope is enormous," right? When they're like somebody's describing their game, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And usually that's true, but it's true because of the context, which is that the scope is not an absolute thing. It's relative to the tools that you have to accomplish the task, the human resources to use the tools, and the skills that they have, and then the amount of cognitive load required, right? Mm-hmm. And so each one of those things is actually an independent lever that you can manipulate and do stuff with. but that propagates into all the rest, right? So we go really heavy on tools because that reduces cognitive load, reduces the number of people needed to make the same amount of things, and reduces the amount of skill needed, right, to make things. And so if you go really tool heavy, you can knock all those other things down pretty rapidly. But you could try to do it the other ways also, where you just say everyone just has high cognitive load all the time because we're not investing in tools, right? And we have to meet this vision that we have, but we just have more people and we make a design that splits the load up more so that.
Yeah. And something that you'll see in AAA teams is like, so investing in tools is a long-term thing, right? And like much larger scale AAA studios tend to solve most problems by throwing a lot of people at them, right? And then having those people highly specialize. And they are a little bit more begrudging to hit pause on things and invest in a bunch of tools.
Pause
right?
costs a lot in absolute monies at that scale.
Right? Yeah. So if they stop development on their game for a month to work on the engine, then they would think like, oh, did we just miss our launch date by a month? But of course, probably not because you improved your engine enough, right? But, nobody thinks in those terms. And so that's where you find, I think it's really interesting seeing the way that job positions get posted at larger companies where they will say like, we want a loot designer, right? Like we want somebody whose job it is to only just work with the loot systems in our game. Or we want a combat programmer or whatever, because they isolate people out into these departments and that's how they've scaled, right? Because they're thinking the game is complex enough that no person can handle the cognitive load of the code base and the systems and everything else, which I still think is actually like true of a team. Like the amount of communication necessary for everybody to be on the same page is very high. And I still think that the only way to really solve the problem is with tools. Yeah. And you shouldn't have to know all the things, right? But yeah, everybody tries to solve this problem in a bunch of different ways. And then, the question of whether or not it's in scope or out of scope is, it's all context dependent. So like in our case, when it comes to making Crashlands 2, the reason we're making the game changer is because we saw what I would consider a resource scoping problem, right? Which is like we had the vision and the design of the game where we wanted it to be, but we didn't have the timeline and the tools to get there. And it was just going to be impossible to manage cognitively, right? So that's what the game changer solves, and it will enable us to do something like Scuffle Buddies if we wanted to make a game that was a lot more strategy based and had like a huge number of, let's say, like, think about a game like Pokemon, right? Yeah. Pokemon has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of characters, each of which can learn bunches of different moves, and those moves have all kinds of interactions. Something like the Game Changer would make it quite easy to do something like that, right? Without having to worry about the scope of it. We'll see. We'll see what happens after Crashlands 2, because whatever happens after Crashlands 2 will be the first game that we will have made, with the Game Changer at the start, right? Because we've had to develop the Game Changer during Crashlands 2, and most of what we did for the first year without the Game Changer. So it's going to change things quite a bit. Next question comes from Retro Banana Man NL, who says, what is your favorite hotkey? I recently got told about Windows V to call the clipboard history, and it has been a game changer for me.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Clipboard
history. That's a good tip. Favorite hotkey?
Because that's really asking what your favorite action is, It's like, what is your favorite thing to do with the press of a button?
So I moved delete in all of my art programs to the number 4 because it's all the way over there. Otherwise,
what's it doing over there?
Both backspace and the del key are both on the right side, which is super annoying. So
it's good on that left hand.
So blowing stuff up, but more conveniently, is very much my favorite one.
So I'm gonna go. All right. So my favorite key of all, favorite hotkey is obviously gonna be Alt Tab.
It's a pretty good one. Yeah.
Which is it's a well-known one, but like, man, imagine not having that.
Yep.
What a horrible life.
I feel like
you would
Alt
live.
Tab also, there's those things that are like the shape of the thing that they represent. Like how the word bed looks like a bed. There's like that sort of weird thing going on. I feel like Alt Tab.
I'm not totally sure about the bed thing, but
the view of the word bed.
You're right.
It
It
looks like
a
does.
bed. Yeah.
It's got a headboard and a
Yeah. So there's like these weird kind of like
footboard.
little bits of nice synchrony or whatever else going on. And like Alt Tab, because again, these are just two random keys that are on the board, right? But it is an alternate tab, right? It's like it feels like it is actually the thing that you're doing as opposed to everything else, like Control V, what? Like that doesn't necessarily feel like pasting something, but like it's an
The number of
alternative.
times I've pressed
tab.
that button, like Alt Tab throughout the day. Although I use a lot of Windows Tab, which is your virtual desktops to navigate between desktops and stuff. So between those two, that's kind of a lot of what I end up doing.
Now, there are some keys that I want to talk about that shouldn't exist.
Yeah, hit me with your beef keys.
Okay.
Beef
Insert.
keys.
The insert key
Agreed.
can just fuck right off.
100%.
As far as I'm concerned. The only time that I hit the insert key is after I have accidentally hit the insert key and need to deactivate. And actually, on a lot of my
it starts deleting your
keyboards,
shit.
on a lot of my keyboards, I actually just pull the insert key off of it so that I don't have an insert key.
Good.
Okay. Because why? Why does this exist? Who says, I want to type exactly over this thing that I just typed, but
so
not in a
weird.
way that like, it's such a bizarre thing. I've never seen anybody purposely use the insert key for literally
It
anything.
feels like an aggressive typewriter holdover, right? Where you literally had to type over things, but the cognitive requirements to be like, oh shit, I need to replace this with this other thing. I need to know how
with
many
the correct
characters
number of
each
characters.
one has, so I know if it actually lines up, and therefore I can choose if I should use insert or like why.
It's the dumbest shit I've ever seen. Okay.
Actually,
So
if anybody out there uses insert, please
for?
tell us.
what are you doing?
Are you
doing
missing something?
What is
I will say,
so insert,
insert.
also numlock.
Numlock is also bad. Yeah.
You
Because it should
ever
always
try
be
to use
on.
your numpad and you can't? Numlock. Why
Why?
is there a button that only turns off a chunk of my keyboard? Why don't we have a letter lock key that just lets me not type letters too, or a space lock where I can hit that and I can't use the space bar anymore? Why stop at the numpad? Just give me all kinds of landmines to just fuck over my typing experience.
Also,
I mean, I
put
think
it
the
right next to the
numpad-
thing you want. It's good.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that numlock is supposed to swap state into movement keys, right? So when numlock is off,
Yeah, but I already have those.
Oh, yeah, I don't know
already
why.
have arrow keys.
but it is not that it just disables them; it just turns them into useless keys, which is, I guess, effectively the same.
Yeah, because when I press 4 on the numpad, what I want to do is go left. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, I think my favorite hotkeys are context specific ones that do cool stuff. So for me, it's basically all in my code editor, Visual Studio Code, where I have a handful of hotkeys that just do some things that if I didn't have them are really annoying. And I would say like probably my favorite one is control quote, which toggles the kind of quote marks used. So like if I just stick my cursor inside of a sentence that has quotes around it, and then I just hit that button, then it like finds the quotes on the outside, and then it toggles them to a different kind of quote, because there's like 3 kinds of quotes in programming that I need to be able to use. And because like it's weirdly common for JavaScript that I need to be able to like swap the kind of quotes that it is. And I can just like, I can be writing in the string, just like writing stuff in it and be like, oh shit, I need the other kind of quote. And just hit control that thing, and it just flips them. So I have a whole bunch of like weird things like that make a lot of sense in a programming context, but not elsewhere. But the other one, which again, these aren't exactly hotkeys, but it's like,
Yeah, they are.
but like,
It is.
It is, but like
macro,
it's context aware, yeah. But also in code editors, being able to just highlight something and then just hit a left paren or a left square bracket or a left curly bracket or a left quote
wraps it.
or whatever, and it just wraps that selection in that thing instead of deleting it and replacing it. Like I use that so much, and I've gotten so used to it that I always try to use it in other things like Google Docs and stuff, And every time I'm like, fuck, because I just deleted something instead of wrapping it. So, but I like.
Oh, it's something. What was it you told me about, Adam? How you can hold control and press left or right arrows, and
Oh yeah, that goes forward and back in history.
it goes forward and back by a word.
Oh, that one, yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
Control-
which I didn't know about. That you just like can jump to the next word in like pretty much any word processor.
Yeah, if you're in a word
or
processor
whatever.
and you hold down control, hit left and right arrow keys, it'll jump from word to word. And if you're holding shift at the same time, it'll also select while it's going. So you can like
Nice. I think my favorite one in like a little more context specific in image programs is the control click or control shift click, where it, depending on where your mouse is, it basically shoots a line into the depths of whatever the painting is.
Oh,
and
like
whatever
those
it hits, whatever layer it actually hits first, it selects that layer to draw on. Some people don't use this, and I don't know how they're not dead.
So they just go to the menu on the side and just
try to find
through
it.
layers.
Yeah. And I'm like, no, you just control click or control shift click to get the one you want by looking at it, and it's just so much better. God.
Oh, okay. I got one more. That's awesome.
No, hit me.
Okay, and this is something in Inkscape, and I don't know if other programs do it, but it's the style paste.
Yeah. Other programs do it.
Control
Shift
Shift
V. Yeah.
Control Shift V. Yeah, so you
Google
like,
Docs
in
has
Inkscape.
that. Lots of things. Have
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like in Inkscape, if you got like let's say you got like a green circle with like a black outline around it with a stroke thickness of 3, right? If you copy that shape and then you just click on any other thing, just select any other object and a Control Shift V, then that thing will become green with the same outline and same stroke and everything. It keeps everything else, but just pastes the style.
Inkscape's version of that is because that one's very cool and very surprising. Because in lots of other contexts, that's how you strip styling off of something when you paste it in. But there, it's actually you only take the styling, which is it's like thematic, like it's related so you can remember, but it's different. Yeah, I feel like I'm just spoiled by code editors because they do so much more. When you're and like they have plugins that do more stuff, and because some of my other favorite ones are was it control up and down to just the line you're on, just to move it up and down, like to swap.
Just move it.
You can just change the order of things, just by just doing that. There's just all kinds of
want
stuff like
this
that that's
up
just makes it so easy to just manipulate things really fast that you just don't get in regular text editors. Multi-cursors.
Now, I will say though,
so good.
I think here's the thing. I love hotkeys, just hotkeys. I think picking a favorite one is doing a disservice to all of those hardworking hotkeys out there
That's true.
give us so much, and ask for so little. The thing that we all should do as a society is we should try to respect and appreciate our hotkeys more and like go into the programs that you use a lot and look through their menus and look at those hotkeys and learn them.
Find a lonesome hotkey that's been left to the waste, that like you don't know about, maybe no one knows about. And
Yeah, because it has almost never been the case that I learn some hotkey combination and think like, man, I wish I hadn't learned that. It's almost always instead like, damn, this is great. There's this new thing that I can do, and I can do it instantly so fast. And if people instead just spend all their time like doing everything by, select something with the mouse and like right click it, and try to like navigate a menu. Don't waste your time.
It is an interesting
Hotkeys.
thing though, right? Is hotkeys both make available but also hide enormous amounts of like things that you can do.
Yeah.
Right. And I think like a code editor is a really good example because literally like if you open up in my code editor with between the stuff that's built in plus all the extensions and stuff I have, there's literally like 1,000 hotkeys, like not even exaggerating, just like different things that I can make happen, right? I couldn't possibly memorize all of them and wouldn't even want to use the vast majority of them, right? But every once in a while, there's something that I had no idea was possible, right? And like one of them that I've been coding for just forever, because it was only like a couple years ago when I discovered this, or maybe I think Sure told me about it. I think it's Alt left arrow or right arrow in my code editor just moves my cursor back to the last position my cursor was in, right? No matter what file it was in. So if I have like, if I have a project open, right, and I've been like moving between files, I'm trying to like organize my code and stuff, and like I work on something here, and then I have to go over here to fix something else and whatever, and I need to get back to where I was, I can just hit Alt left and go.
It's like your own little browser history.
Yeah, it's amazing. And actually, you can use that
Where
in
was I?
in the browser too. Like a browser also respects that same thing to go back and forward in history, right? Which is that's like one of the things I just had no idea existed because it only lives in hotkeys, right? It's like not.
The way I think about it is like this is how you become immortal. Like this is the fountain of youth, right?
True.
Because if you can just any task that would have taken somebody a minute now takes you 1 second, right? Then you've now just like stolen time from the future.
Hotkeys are the path to godhood, I think is the truth, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's people say like, time is finite and you can never have more of it. It's like, yes, you can actually. You can have infinite time if you just learn enough hotkeys. All right. Next question comes from cprice, who says, knowing what you do now, would you go back and tell 2014 to 2016 Bscotch to stop making Crashlands 1 and instead make the game changer? Or do you think that you had to go through the experiences of making Crashlands and Levelhead to obtain the knowledge to design, build, and deploy the game changer?
Definitely we wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah, I think if
we shouldn't have done it then.
I'm pretty sure people probably were telling us. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like it's a rare piece of knowledge out there to be like, oh yeah, if you want to go really fast, you should take time to build really good tools. If you want more of a thing, build a really good tool to make more.
Well, and we thought, like I said, we were doing that. We were building tools, right? But it's limited by the combination of our capacity and knowledge and ability to do that stuff, and how we understand project management to work, right? And like what productivity means and all that kind of stuff. And we did invest heavily in miscellaneous tools.
I mean, the story,
time, right?
The Crashlands creator was the thing that we did. That's the closest thing.
It basically is an early game changer, right?
Yeah. It is.
But it was still so limited because we hadn't seen the kinds of patterns and ways of generalizing things. We hadn't seen the kinds of problems over and over again. And the reason it was restricted to like the text and then like these and like kind of drawing stuff out in the world and stuff versus much more deeply integrated is we just couldn't really conceive of what it meant to offload things that to us just seemed obviously programmatic, like things that a programmer has to do, into this new space where it's just data. Like that strict separation, I think, was something we just didn't have a strong enough hold on until very recently.
Yeah, we had a basic idea of it, but it was always thinking of things in very specific terms, right? It was like, how do we edit the Crashlands campaign data?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Not how do we edit data, right? We all like anytime we would solve a problem, we would always only think about it in those and it's in its little silo, in its bubble. Yeah, you're right. Like until you've seen enough of those, you can't zoom out enough to find the overlap
and try to generalize and to varying degrees of success, right? Because we've made fuckloads of tools. We've experimented with different approaches to how we organize things, how we organize the work, how we do our pipelines. We've done tons and tons of experiments to various levels of success and failure and so on, right? And I think even if you can conceive like in the kind of vague terms of one of these ideas, it's really hard to fully grok even the concept without having not only sort of seen the ideas before somehow, but tried to do stuff. And that's just something that just takes fuckloads of time,
And game maker trying to make the game changer in the game maker of old would have been an absolute nightmare because they've done so much to update the IDE and the engine and what it's capable of, so that it's actually quite easy for us to not easy, but like it's complicated to make something doable. Like the game changer. But it's not hard because of the engine, right? It's just hard because it's a complex and hard thing to solve. Whereas in the past, I guess just to put it pretty briefly, it now takes one line of code to do something that would have taken 10 lines of code in the past.
And that would have had a 10% likelihood of creating an error. So,
but one that was very hard to find. I think, and also, it's easy to say like, knowing what you know now, because one of the things we didn't know now was what was going to happen with Sam's cancer.
That's true.
Yep. And we were in short-term mode.
100%.
Correctly.
Yep.
Right. And so that's another thing. It's like, you don't know what's going to happen next week or tomorrow or a month from now. But there are sometimes things that happen that make you a lot more aware of just how unknown that immediate future is. And that was one of those things. And I think we just did the best we could.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, that's an important point to acknowledge, that the reality of how the world is structured that we live in and how we're taught to do things, but also just how we're allowed to do things, is that it tries to put everything in the short term. And it's really hard to spend time investing in the long term because sort of just across the board, nobody believes in that, So like, if you can't give a return to shareholders, if you can't go tell an investor like, oh yeah, like we're going to spend like a year building these amazing tools so we can make this thing, right? And they're not going to give you money for that. They want to see that you've already done it.
Like, no. Don't do the tools. Just make the thing.
Yeah.
Just make the thing.
And like,
the tools part.
Yeah, they don't care if it's broken. They don't care if it's not scalable because they're going to be like, we're going to give you $100 million. You can hire 200 people. And that's how they solve the problem, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's all very short term. And so that is the reality of this stuff, is that there's a certain amount of luxury in being able to actually just think long term.
The reality is that we are mortal. So you can think long term.
We're trying not to be, because we use hotkeys, but
exactly. Yeah. That's part of the fight against it. But I think you can.
Yeah.
Anytime you're working for far future endeavors, there is an inherent risk, which is just that you won't be around to capitalize on any of it, really.
Or that you just run out of resources before you get there.
Yeah, I mean, whether you're dead or the studio's dead or whatever. Yeah, right.
Something's dead.
Something's usually dead. And we talk about this with networking, whatever else, which is that most networking efforts don't pay off for, I'd say, probably 2 years plus, in terms of like just getting to know, if you're doing this sort of scattershot, like knowing a lot of people thing in a particular industry. It just takes a fucking minute, for things to pay some dividends. And so sometimes you don't have a minute. And so all you can do is just like jam the stuff in as best you can. And then that's what you got.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason that there's sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say there's a reason that whether it's like lifespan or like the success of a company. If you look at like an actuarial table for a lifespan, right? The longer you continue to live, the more likely you are to live longer than like, right? And it's the same deal with a company. Like the longer the company's been around, the more likely it is to continue being around. And that's basically because of the longer you can survive, the more likely it is that those long-term things get to pay off, right?
Yeah.
Because if you've made it that far, that means you have enough to have made it that far, which means it's likely that you'll have even more stuff coming and so on, right? And so that's a lot of why we stress so much, like just trying to survive in the industry as long as we could, with the idea that eventually, if we could just survive long enough, then it would start to pay off, right?
Yeah, you just rolling, you're just making gambles, right? Whether it's launching games, going to GDC and trying to network with people, meeting other developers, like everything that you're doing is like this little roll of the dice that might pay off at some point later and help you. But if you're not around later, then too bad, right? So you just got to hang in there. All right, so we have one last question, which comes from IcykragDoopot. Hold on, let me try this again.
Is this a rumpus name?
I think it's a rumpus name that got translated a little bit. IcykragDoopot.
IcykragDoopot. It's good.
Who said, or maybe it's Icykrag. It's like ICYK, which is for some reason my brain can't turn those letters into a sound. But they said, how do you understand your old code? Is there anything you use, like a note system? I came back to mine after a month and tried to expand on it. Yet my first thought was, what the heck is this? How did I make this? So used to have this problem until I read, by Adam's suggestion, the book called Clean Code.
It's a good one. Definitely read it.
It's just some basic principles about how to write your code in a way that keeps it clean and understandable. And I think the biggest culprit is names.
Yes, by
the biggest culprit
a million
is names.
miles. Absolutely.
And when I say that, I mean people just don't name things. And so, for example, instead of, let's say they have a variable that represents like the speed that a projectile is traveling. Okay. So you could call that variable P, which a lot of people do. Mm-hmm. And then when they go back and look at it, it'd be like P equals 29. And they're like, the fuck is that? And then eventually they can reverse engineer.
You don't know.
Could be.
But yeah, because the problem is like, well, even if you do figure out that it's the speed, what is the speed in units? Is it pixels per second?
Also, what is it even the speed of?
Yeah. What? So if you have the variable called projectile speed pixels per second, and that's the variable name, it's long, right? Yep. But you know exactly what it is when you see it, and you will never be confused, right? And so in the book, they talk about how when you're programming, you actually are spending at least 90% of your time reading code. So make it readable, right? And
stop
if
worrying
you
about
feel
the
like
writability. But people obsess about like, oh, if I have short names, it's easier to type and so on, right? Well, first, ideally, you have good tools that help you.
learn how to type faster.
And learn how to type faster.
Or autocomplete, man.
Yeah, you use
Autocomplete.
autocompletes. That's where the real magic comes in.
Yeah. And other just like nice little rules, like a function should do one thing, right? Because a function is a little bit of instructions for your computer to do something, right? And if it says like, if let's say this, you got a function that's just like add two numbers together, and that's the name of the function, right? And the function adds two numbers together, but then it also goes and deletes a file somewhere. Okay. Then later on, you'll be like, I want to add some numbers together. I have a function, add two numbers together. And then you didn't realize that, oh shit, I deleted, you got something deleted. Didn't know why, don't know how that happened, where it happened, because you have a function that's secretly going behind your back and sabotaging all your shit.
The nice thing is that these reinforce each other, because if you adopt a really strict belief that you just have to name things to exactly describe what they are and what they're for, right? If you do that, then the moment you try to name a function that does that, because then their function name will now be add two things and also delete a file, right? That's now the name of that
Then
function.
they're like, this is a dumb function.
Yeah, you're like, wait a second, maybe we should break this apart. So it's about conventions with respect to naming. It's basically like that's the whole fucking thing. And then outside of that, and actually along with that, is your tooling, because the tools are what allow you to then name things well and manage that as it starts to get kind of verbose and clunky,
And weirdy.
Yeah, because if you have really good tooling, then it can help you keep track of stuff, because really what you're trying to do is reduce the cognitive load of reading your code. And that's in the moment that you're writing. And this is even stuff like, even if it would be easy to write it in a certain way, I'm trying not to get into weeds here, right? But if you're trying to if you're doing a few steps and it seems obvious to you, it's like, oh, I added this and I added that, and I checked to see if it was true or whatever. If you did something like that in a series, and it's just a series of operations, then somebody going in and reading that, they have to go read all of those and then try to, and then work through it in their brain. What is this doing? But if you instead save all of that as a new thing that's just called like these things added together because whatever, like you just like give it a dumb, long descriptive name, right? That says what that shit represents. Then now, like if I need to debug it, I can go read through the logic of it. But if I'm not trying to debug it, I'm just trying to understand what's happening and orient myself. I don't have to read the logic. I can just look at the name of the thing. I can just read it in human English. And
people also use a lot of comments, right? Where they say like, I put comments everywhere to explain what my code is doing, right? If you have to do that in order to understand the code, it's because your code is unreadable, right? And so I think like, and kind of to Adam's point about giving names to things that you otherwise wouldn't even think to name. So like, here's an easy example is like, let's say you're looking through a list of things and you're using the letter I to represent the position in the list.
It's very common.
So, and then you want something special to happen when you're on the last element of the list, right? So you could have your code say something like, if I equals length of list -1, then do something, right? Or you could make a new variable that's just called
is last
item in list. And then you set that variable to hold the answer to that question. And then when you look at your if statement, it'll say, if is last item in list, then blah. And suddenly you're like, oh, that's English.
Yep.
Like,
Read.
I know what's happening now.
Yeah, turn your code into English. And
I will.
Yeah.
I'll say there's a similar problem on the art side with layers in particular. So I never used to have this problem in Inkscape because we didn't use layers and have anything going on. So
no layers, yeah. Well, you got them, but you just didn't use them because they were a pain in the ass.
So, but with layers are what kind of unlock a lot of just frankly, very robust functionality on the digital side that makes it better than doing stuff traditionally in a lot of ways. But there's one thing that's always missing, which is there's no metadata attached to layers, at least in Pseudo-Paint. I don't blame Photoshop because Photoshop doesn't seem to care too much about what brushes have touched to that particular layer, which means that for those of you who have downloaded, like you can download brush packs of like thousands of textures and stuff like that. You're not going to be able to, when you come back to a piece, even in a week, you come back and look at it, you can't tell what brush you used on that piece unless you either you put it in the name of the layer, which is what I do now, or you have sort of like a curated, very small list of all of those brushes, the big pile of them that you're like using as a set across your work, which I'd recommend.
I assume the reason you want to know that is so that when you go back to edit it, you can use the right brushes.
Exactly. Because otherwise, I mean, imagine, using a pen when it should be a freaking marker. It's like, it doesn't look the same by any stretch. And you kind of need to be able to go back and do stuff to it.
Because if you don't name things, then you have to reverse engineer stuff.
And the other one I'll recommend on the art side too is at least in Clip Studio Paint, there's a layer color option which sounds kind of funny, but basically what you can do is you can just set all of the pixels in a particular layer to only be a particular color. So let's say I did some line work for a thing and it's in, red or something. And then later I'm like, oh, I want this to be black. You just hit that layer color filter thing, basically the like application on the layer itself, turn it to black. This is one really useful thing for looking through your layers, which is that if you're working on layers that have a lot of smaller, sparser details, like usually it's highlight layers, stuff like that, where you literally like, there's a whole thumbnail down there, but you can't see shit in the thumbnail. Like it just is a blank space. You also don't want to have to take the time to name every layer actually in art stuff because you have too fucking many of them. It's a pain in the ass. So the benefit of having the layer color be an established thing where you actually only work in one color on a particular layer, and obviously this doesn't work for everybody, but in my case it does, is that it puts you actually see the color that is on that layer in like these big block squares that pop out sort of on top of that little cropped image where you can't see shit. So you can actually tell like, oh, that's where my orange highlight's coming from. And you can just see it, even though the thumbnail doesn't show you when the thumbnail's trying to show you, but it can't.
Yeah, I do the same thing because organizing like code files is also a huge problem. Like so any one of my I just migrated a project from one place to another end of last week, and I was confused because there were 300 files, and I was like, is this project really that big? There were 300 fucking files, and it was, and it's organized in a particular way, right? But like I remember back when I was working on that project a lot, like just navigating that was really hard, right? And so over time, I worked on my organization. But the other thing that I've learned over time too is to take completely different approaches to naming things. Like Sam is talking about here. He basically said, what does the tool allow, even if it's not for that purpose, right? And so, and what can I get away with? Can I find some things that it wasn't really intended for? And so, like one of the things I discovered I could do was if I organize my code into what the software calls a workspace, right? But if I organize it in that way and told that it was a workspace, I have access to extra settings. One of the things I can do is tell it which folders are like my main folders, and it puts them all as if they're at the root instead of wherever they actually are, right? So it's already cool. Now it's like flattened and made a little easier to see. But the other thing is I can just put a new name in there that only shows up in the sidebar, even if the folder has a completely different name, actually, right? And I also found I can use emojis in those names, and it works just fine. Right.
Oh, sick. So you can basically flag them as like this is what I'm working on today.
Put icons on it.
So I can just see it. And so I just have icons that like make so Rumpus, for example, is a peach because it looks like a butt, for rump, So like if I see a peach, you're like, oh, that's a Rumpus thing. Like and it turns out that in the editor, everywhere you see a file, if you have like this like multi-folder kind of setup, it shows you the whole path to that file with the name of that folder in front of it. Which means now every time I see any file, it's tagged with like some cute little emoji that I can use to immediately grok what it is. And before I did that, and a few other things that I also changed, before I did that, I would be like looking at a file and trying to figure out what am I looking at right now?
Yep.
Well, it's just a nightmare. And the more stuff I put together in one place, it became just less and less possible to manage. And then I just was experimenting with stuff because I just needed a better solution. Tried stuff, even if I thought it wouldn't work because like, why would anybody let me put emojis into a folder name now? And then it just did. So I was like, dope. Slick. It's all about cognitive load and trying to reduce it.
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely read that book, Clean Code. And otherwise, like these guys were saying, just think about your tools. And if you're having a hard time navigating a project or whatever, that's refactor time. It's time to look at what you've got going on and add tags, change some things, make it so that it's easier to understand. And that way, the next time you have to revisit it, it'll be no problem at all.
Yeah. And it's also about tools to use. Yeah. So, and there are things where the tooling makes it harder or easier, right? Because if you can't rename things easily, that makes all this a lot harder because then you can't fix a thing when it's a little unclear or whatever, right? But if it is easy, then, because like I rename stuff constantly. Like every time I'm reading code, if I'm confused even for a second, then I rename the thing I'm looking at because the tooling that I use makes it so that I can trust that that's going to work. But if you don't have that, you're just kind of stuck because, renaming stuff introduces risk of errors. So
try to pick good names at the beginning.
Yeah, pick good names. And when you have access to, and when you have a choice between tools, choose the one that's going to give you the best support for writing good code, even if you don't like the language as much. This is why a lot of people like typed languages, is even though it's really strict and it forces you to do things, it makes it hard to do some stuff. The tooling now can do so much for you to help you write your code, and most importantly, to help you edit your code. And so, when you have a choice,
Use typed language.
Yep.
Unless you don't, in which case just name stuff well.
Just name stuff well.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Jen Coster, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net. We have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.